For centuries, historians claimed this British Chief Justice took a massive, infamous bribe in colonial India. But that historical smear is completely fake. The real story starts with a colonial crisis. Local courts were handed to dangerously inexperienced junior officers. Many were illiterate, corrupt, and a few were barely teenagers. The entire legal system broke down, sparking a bitter conflict between tax collectors and these incompetent judges. Desperate, Governor General Warren Hastings begged Chief Justice Impey to step in. He asked Impey to take control of a Supreme Appellate Court to fix the mess. Hastings offered him a massive salary of 5,000 rupees a month for the grueling second job. Political enemies immediately weaponized this, calling it a corrupt bribe to buy the judge. But here's how the historical lie shatters. Impey actually refused to pocket the money. He put the salary on hold, offering to refund every penny if the British government didn't approve. Instead of acting like a corrupt puppet, Impey meticulously drafted a highly effective legal code. He successfully reformed the disastrous courts and brought order to the chaos. The infamous bribe that destroyed his reputation was actually a fabricated political hit job, invented entirely by his enemies to cover up his brilliant, successful rescue of a collapsing legal system. To understand the administrative crisis in 18th century Bengal, we have to start with the sheer physical and human scale of the territory. By 1780, the East India Company governed roughly 10 million people across Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. Their entire civil service cadre consisted of just 200 to 300 Englishmen. Within that, only 20 to 30 officials were qualified to administer justice. George Bogle, the Commissioner of Lawsuits, noted this disparity in a letter regarding the Patna cause. He observed that if every dispute among these millions had to be decided by these 30 men, it would be impossible to maintain the government. This ratio created a severe disconnect, where the administrative requirements of the population far exceeded the bureaucracy's physical ability to process them. Two primary institutions managed the colony's affairs: the provincial councils, which handled executive revenue collection, and the Supreme Court, which provided judicial oversight. Because their jurisdictions overlapped, these bodies entered a violent institutional conflict in 1779. The resulting friction between revenue and judicial authorities effectively paralyzed the administration. Governor General Warren Hastings needed a plan to eliminate this institutional friction before it triggered a broader collapse of the government. The judicial overhaul Hastings implemented in 1780 was designed as a systems-level patch. It aimed to stabilize the East India Company by resolving the contradictions in its hierarchy. To achieve this stability, the 1780 plan sought to separate the personnel collecting revenue from the personnel enforcing civil law. The first phase of this restructuring began on April 11, 1780, with the passage of new regulations for the administration of justice. These regulations stripped the provincial councils of their civil judicial powers. From this point forward, their jurisdiction was restricted to matters with an immediate relation to the public revenue. To handle civil disputes, Hastings created the role of Superintendent of the Diwaniya Adalat. This new office was established to be independent of the provincial councils. Defining the jurisdiction was only one requirement. To be effective, the court system had to be physically accessible to the population across the territory. This led to a rollout of 18 mufasal, or provincial courts, spread across the interior. These nodes were intended to provide a decentralized network for civil justice. While this solved the bottleneck on paper, the rapid expansion of 18 remote nodes created a new challenge regarding the quality and oversight of the presiding officers. Because of the existing personnel shortage, the men appointed to run these 18 independent courts were often junior servants of the company. These inexperienced officials were suddenly responsible for property cases involving values that exceeded those handled by the highest courts in England. Chief Justice Impey heavily criticized these appointments, noting many new judges were only recently made writers. Highlighting Mr. Booth in Bihar, Impey described him as totally illiterate in his own and ignorant of any Eastern languages, yet responsible for an entire province. This decentralized network required a central superintending authority to prevent these unqualified officials from exercising power without constraint. Hastings addressed this need for oversight in a minute produced in council on September 29, 1780. He proposed reviving the Sadr Diwani Adalat, intending it to serve as a superior court with the power to remedy defects and form regulations for the 18 inferior courts. Hastings then requested that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Sir Elijah Impey, accept the charge and superintendency of this company court. Impey's appointment linked the legal authority of the Crown's Supreme Court directly to the company's regional Mufasal network, allowing for the downward flow of legal instruction and oversight. This move met with immediate resistance from members of Hastings' own council, who objected to this concentration of power. Council members Wheeler and Francis argued that placing an English lawyer over native courts would import alien law and create an undesirable confusion between Impey's dual roles in the Crown and company systems. Hastings nevertheless pushed the measure through, using his casting vote in October 1780 to finalize the appointment. Hastings prioritized immediate administrative stability, betting that Impey's oversight was the necessary mechanism to prevent the collapse of the provincial courts. For much of the 19th century, historians like James Mill and Thomas Macaulay framed this structural change as a corrupt political payoff. Mill and Macaulay characterized the appointment as a bribe, a description that heavily influenced the historical perception of the 1780 reforms. This characterization is challenged by the actual administrative output of Impey's tenure. Between October 1780 and July 1781, Impey compiled a comprehensive code of regulations for the Diwani courts. This service was later documented as being of great utility to the administration of justice. Records also show that Impey's salary was not fixed until late December 1780, and he offered to refund it if the king's ministers disapproved. The role appears to have been driven by administrative necessity rather than a prearranged payoff. The 1780 reforms are best understood not as a political bargain, but as a pragmatic solution to a failing state bureaucracy. The legal architecture established in 1780 proved incredibly durable, eventually evolving from a temporary fix into a permanent institution. The separate systems Hastings had integrated, the Crown's Supreme Court and the company's Sadr Diwani Adalat, remained linked for 80 years. In 1861, these institutions were formally united to create the modern High Court system. The administrative precedent set in 1780, specifically the central oversight of regional Mufasal courts and the placement of local legislation under a legal authority, remained the template for the 1861 High Court Act. What began as an emergency measure to manage 10 million people with 30 men provided the structural foundation for subcontinental jurisprudence over the following century.